Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Today, we delve into the critical issues surrounding not only Israel's security, but its significance to the United States. Our guest is Victoria Coates, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, and also a former Deputy National Security Advisor for the Middle East and North Africa during President Trump's first term in office. Victoria brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion. We talk about Donald Trump's latest visit to the region, the current and ongoing negotiations with Iran, and the differences between Jerusalem and Washington on how those talks and what type of deal should be reached, as well as Victoria's new book, The Battle for the Jewish State, where Victoria examines not only October 7th and the Hamas attack against Israel, but she also argues that it's a conflict that's not just regional, but it's a broader cultural war that must be won not just for the sake of Israel, but also for the sake of the United States. She suggests that what happened in previous administrations not only imperiled Israel, but also the United States, because it abandoned strategies that were meant to defeat the ideologies that are fostered on college campuses and across different cultural circles in the United States and are undermining not only Israel, but also America's own security. So join me as we explore Victoria's insights on the region and the ideological battles facing Israel and America today. Here we go. Victoria, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
It's so I want to talk about and start with what is a lot of Israelis right now are looking at the some are seeing it as daylight between the Trump administration and the state of Israel. There was Trump's obvious visit to the region where he skipped over Israel, did not make it to Israel, went instead to Gulf states. And there's been also just this kind of lower level of criticism that people are pointing out, whether what's happening in Gaza or the president's approach that the war needs to come to an end, and maybe it will very soon. But I'm curious how you view what's currently happening and if Israelis really should be concerned about this maybe shift that we're seeing with the Trump administration, particularly President Trump's approach to the conflict.
I wouldn't see it as at all surprising. It's what we saw in the first term when there was just a cottage industry of media in both Israel and the United States, most of whom do tend liberal, not to be terribly fond of either President Trump or Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying, oh my gosh, there's palace intrigue. There's a clash of personalities. Well, guess what? Both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are politicians with outsized personalities. They're two of the best known faces on the planet, both extraordinarily successful in both of their systems, and they've known each other a long time. Now, does that mean that they're in lockstep and they see everything the same way? It does not, because last time I looked, the United States and Israel are both sovereign nations with our individual interests. I think both of them expect that. And sometimes, there are going to be differences of opinion. Now, what they've done this time, as it was our practice in the first Trump term, is if they did have a disagreement, and heaven knows I wasn't on that call, so I can't speak to that. But if they did have a disagreement, they did it in private and, put out a normal press statement afterwards. And Secretary Noem went to visit over the weekend, so maybe more messages were carried then. But again, she did it in private. There was none of the airing of grievances that you saw in the Biden and Obama administration. So I wouldn't see this as a big change. I would see it as more of the same. And, the relationship, as I understand it, fundamentally is as close as it's ever been.
How do you understand what is the president's objective right now? Because it does seem that he wants, obviously, this war to end. And I think probably most Israelis want the war to come to an end. And they want it to come to an end with the hostages. We're talking as 20 living hostages are believed to still be in the hands of Hamas, another 30 plus bodies that are still being held by Hamas. But beyond just being able to end the war, the Israelis have genuine concerns, right? Their concerns are what happens in the aftermath, who takes over Gaza. And you write a lot about this in your new book, The Battle for the Jewish State. So I am curious, when you look at what America's interest is here, and obviously it's going to be different than Israel's, right? There's always going to be competing interests, and each country has different interests. But what does the president want to see beyond just the war ending?
I think what he would like to see is that some of the burden for both the reconstruction, but more importantly, for the establishment of whatever kind of institutions come next, some of that burden has to fall on the Palestinians. And this was the mindset that was behind his offer to maybe find them safe haven elsewhere. People have talked about Libya. They've talked about Belgium, other countries that have concentrations of a Palestinian population. Panama, for example, has a not insignificant contributing integrated Palestinian population, could be a candidate. But, I think he would like to see that offer made to the Palestinians of Gaza, that you could go somewhere like, Indonesia is another good one. You could find a job there. There would be support for you there if you would like to leave Gaza. And they've never been asked that. And right now they're being held prisoners. Hamas has control of them, and the Egyptians won't let them out through Rafah, and the Israelis obviously won't let them run into the hinterlands of Israel after what just happened on October 7th. So make that offer. You get the population to a manageable level, see if there is any interest in building civil society, because that's the thing. I mean, essentially, the Palestinians have governed Gaza for the last 20 years and developed nothing that looks like what we would understand as even a fledgling seedling state. And so, with that reality, they've got to figure out what they want to do, cough up those hostages. It's absolutely a disgrace that they're holding on to bodies as well as these poor 20 people who've got to come out of there. I mean, and that's where the pressure should be. The notion that the Europeans are spending all their time pressuring Israel right now is just, it's ghoulish. What everyone should be doing is telling Hamas it's over, and, surrender, give up the hostages, and you might live. Those are the terms. That's not negotiable. So I think, that's what the president wants to get to, is that kind of end state where then this becomes largely an internal Israeli security situation, not something that demands the constant attention and engagement of the United States, because we got a lot of things we got to focus on.
How do you see, and you've been to Israel a lot. You were just here, I think, just a few weeks ago for the JNS summit and that conference. And, I know you've been here many times over the years, and I've had the opportunity to sit with you and chat over the years. But how do you see this war ending? What does the day after look like from your perspective?
Well, ideally, from my perspective, the day after is when the Palestinians accept that they lost in 1967, that this has not been a battle of equals since then. They have been essentially duped by the international community, so-called, into thinking that their cause was righteous, that the destruction of Israel was something the rest of the world could get behind, bolstered by endless United Nations General Assembly resolutions to that effect, to this very vocal support from our European allies who should know better, that for all of these, and then the vocal support, although not so much material support, of the Arab world. It's for all these reasons they think, and also what's going on our streets and campuses in the United States, they think they have this support. And the fact of the matter is that any reasonable person would look at this and say they've lost every military engagement over a 50-year period now. And, their state is ever more wretched because of the dwindling resources they're being provided, because the Arabs may talk tough, but they're not going to pour money into a hole in the ground. And so all of that support that they've enjoyed has dried up. And meanwhile, they've essentially blown up everything the Israelis have done for them over the years. I worked on that file for a year. And there are all sorts of projects, as you know, that are shovel ready, but no one will commit the funding, even though the funding is available, but no one will commit it because It's just going to get blown up. So, I would like to see this end with the insistence by that very international community that the Palestinians have lost, that there is not going to be a so-called Palestine in the area of modern Israel, that Israel has won. And, Israel can make whatever kind of territorial arrangements that Israel thinks are acceptable. And, that should be a wake-up call for the Palestinians, that if they want to survive as a nation, which they claim to be, that's going to be their best offer at this point.
So what is it with Europe that they don't get this? Because, I see the statements that come out by Canada and France and the UK and Germany also here, right? And it's like they're not understanding that what they're doing is emboldening Hamas, is making Hamas literally believe, hey, if we keep doing this, it works, right? We can win because we'll get Israel isolated. We'll get the world to cut off ties. We'll get sanctions imposed on the state of Israel. And in the end, Israel will have to back down because it'll be isolated when we are getting this windfall of support from countries that should stand by the victims. I mean, it's absurd.
Oh, it really is, especially as you have radical Islamic terrorism stalking the continent. I mean, I'm not an armchair psychologist, but I would say, I mean, it's like it's a combination of collective guilt for what happened in the Second World War and the very factors that allowed what happened in the Second World War to happen. And so they're dealing with that internal disconnect. But I mean, I would just think out of practicality, this shouldn't be a Jewish issue or an anti-Semitism issue. This should be a practical issue. I mean, with whom do the Europeans want to partner? I mean, do you want the modern state of Israel, one of the 20 most powerful countries on the planet, a great incubator of technology and all sorts of arts and sciences and good things for humanity? Do you want that, or do you want the Palestinians? And they seem to have struggled with this decision, which is mind-boggling to me. So I think, this is what we have to call out because, shamefully, what was revealed in literally the hours after October 7th, most painfully for us on Friday, was, or Thursday, I was traveling, so I'm getting my days mixed up, is that this is here in America. And that's why the subtitle of my book is How Israel and America Can Win, because we're in this battle too. And the fact that you're having Israeli diplomats hunted on the streets of Washington, D.C. means we have a problem. And so, yes, I am here all day to throw shade at the Europeans and Canadians, but at the same time, we have to clean up our own house as well.
So I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I do want to just press you on Iran, because that is obviously the big issue for Israel and the potential existential threat. And I saw a video just the other day of Abbasi, who's the former head of the Atomic Energy Commission there, who basically says, look, we're there. I mean, we just have to make the decision that we want to build the bomb, and then we build the bomb, and so that they're a nuclear threshold state. And the talks that are taking place, and there was the last round on Friday in Rome where Steve Witkoff, the president's Middle East special envoy, met with the foreign minister of Iran, and those talks are continuing, more expected to take place. And the president has voiced optimism that a deal is possible. We know that Israel is very skeptical, of course. How do you see this playing out? I mean, there are some people who have argued that the Trump administration is basically just going back to the JCPOA, right? The 2015 accord that Barack Obama reached, maybe with some minor improvements, but there's not much more that can be done. Is this going to be a deal, if one is reached, that's going to ease the Israeli concerns?
I very much hope so. We've just done a long-form report. My former NSC colleague and now my deputy at the Heritage Foundation, Rob Greenway, and I did an Iran report, essentially saying that both the folks who want to strike Iran today and the folks who say no strike is possible are probably wrong, that the president needs a full range of options. We support his diplomatic outreach within limits in terms of time. And so one of the points we make is that we're all looking at this October deadline for the snapback of the sanctions that were eased under the JCPOA. So this kind of rumor that the Omanis are putting out there a six month essentially freeze on Iranian enrichment, that's a problem, because that takes us well beyond that. Any sanctions relief that came with that freeze is a problem, because it would prevent the snapback in the event, as the Iranians said, that they decide to build a bomb next Tuesday. Then we've started giving them money for that project. That's a problem. And at the same time, I think rightly Americans are concerned about getting entangled in another war in the Middle East. And I think the president's right not to talk about regime change. That is an issue for the Iranian people, not the American people. If they take things into their own hands, they've done it before. No one would be happier than I. But that's not my errand. My errand is to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. So rather than a grand proposal to remake Iranian society on the model of Virginia, I think we should, if we're talking about any kind of American engagement, it should be a targeted strike on technical facilities, because historically, that kind of strike has gotten no response from the Iranians. And you think of Operation Praying Mantis, for example, the largest military action the Americans have taken against the Iranians under President Reagan, got no response. The Israelis struck, the nuclear facilities in Iraq and in Syria. Historically, no response from those regimes because they knew Israel had capabilities they didn't have. The Iranians know the Americans have vastly superior capabilities. So if it is targeted, I think we can't frighten ourselves into the bedroom closet of, oh my gosh, we're going to have a World War III if we take a small action should these negotiations fail. So we want all the options on the table, in short.
And you think that the president is prepared for maybe that military option, or is he prepared at the most to give Israel the green light to do something on its own?
Well, he said he's prepared. When they were flying out to California a couple of weeks ago, he said, if it's necessary, not only will we support Israel, we'll lead it. And so I think he knows that is an option. He's been careful, as I said, to keep it on the table, to not say this, I'm never, ever going to do anything. He showed with the Soleimani strike, he's fully capable of making that decision. He explored a lot of options ahead of time, was very cautious about it. But when it came time to make the decision, he was fine with it. And it was one of the signature achievements of the first term. So I think we're watching the same kind of process play out now.
And I think to his credit, right, what he's done with the Houthis, for example, and his very explicit military threat against the Iranians is something that I think goes far beyond what we've seen by any past president. The most we were able to get out of Biden and Obama was all options are on the table, but never a very explicit and clear threat like the one that Donald Trump has sent across the bow. So that's definitely something that carries some weight. I want to, Victoria, I want to take you to your book for a moment. And in the battle for the Jewish state, you do talk about really how the attack on October 7th against Israel was not just against Israel, but it was also something that the Americans have been ignoring for a long time and have denied, and that it's not some faraway conflict like most people tend to look at it, but this is an attack against America's interests and an attack against America's way of life. So explain to us why that's the case.
Well, there's sort of two pieces to it. The first and most immediate is that the Hamas and PIJ and everyday Palestinian terrorists that flooded into Israel didn't care who they attacked. They didn't ask for passports. Oh my gosh, you're an American, move along. No, they just wanted to attack Jews. And so the Biden administration, like the Obama administration before them, had hoped that by turning back on the spigots of U.S. aid to the Palestinians, we were well over $1 billion to them before October 7th happened during the Biden administration, that they would realize that America was their friend and not do something like this that would kill dozens of Americans and take many Americans hostage, the last of which living, obviously, Adnan Alexander just got out. So that was sort of fallacy number one, that they wouldn't attack anything that involved Americans. Yep, they did. And then number two was that we don't have an anti-Semitism problem here in the United States. Well, that was clearly not the case. And not only did we have the anti-Israel folk coming out immediately right around the attack, as if they almost were waiting for a sign. Not only did we have that, these people are overtly pro-Hamas. They carry Hamas flags. They wear the I guess what's the new radical chic of the COVID mask and the keffiyeh in support of Hamas. And so the notion that these are somehow peaceful political protests against Israel is just false. And when they go out into these campuses, what do? They deface the monuments of our founders, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and my alma mater of the University of Pennsylvania, and try to enlist them as somehow supporters of the Palestinian cause. So this is really striking at the roots of American cultural identity and trying to appropriate it to this radical terrorist organization. And so, as we all saw that happening, saw the extraordinary testimony of the three university presidents in December of 23, and Senator Cruz honored me by writing the introduction to the book, and he writes about that very passionately. I mean, this is a problem for the United States. And so, at Heritage, we, both I had the support of President Roberts for the book, but we're also developing a plan for anti-Semitism here at home, because the State Department efforts on anti-Semitism, as you know, those are for international anti-Semitism. That special envoy has no domestic remit.
Even the shooter or the alleged murderer, Elias Rodriguez, who killed two Israeli embassy staffers, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram, just a week ago, right, shouted "Free Palestine" as he was led away after his arrest, right, said he did this for the Palestinians, he did this for Palestine. I mean, for too long, maybe, did America allow people to walk around college campuses, to march on streets and parade in LA and Chicago and New York and elsewhere, and shout and chant "Free Palestine" and wear those keffiyehs, as you mentioned, and turn this into a battle cry? This isn't, maybe it's not just freedom of speech and support for people that, yes, some of them, unfortunately, some innocent civilians do get caught up in war, and it's terrible. But this has become something beyond that.
Yeah, cold-blooded murder, last time I looked, wasn't protected under the Constitution, rather the opposite. So the notion that this is somehow free speech is laughable. Yes, anyone can have whatever noxious opinion they want, and they can write about it online. But when it starts to then foment violence, that's the line that we have as the United States defined under our Constitution, is when the speech results in criminal action, and murder is a crime, that is not protected under the Constitution. And so that's what we're working on. This really clarified for me, and I wrote about it in the Battle of the Jewish State, the day Prime Minister Netanyahu was here in late July of last year to give his speech. And at Heritage, we went out on our balconies and watched the sea of protesters going to Union Station, which is right down Massachusetts Avenue. And, they went there and tore down those iconic flags, and they defaced the copy of the Liberty Bell, which I took personally because I'm from Philadelphia. But that's hardly an Israeli sign. And those flags they ripped down and replaced with Palestinian flags were American flags, and they burnt them. So they were making their intentions perfectly clear. And final point on this one is Rodriguez is not exactly an ethnic Palestinian. And my understanding is, the young man who was murdered was Christian. So this is, this is being taken out of any kind of Israeli context, despite the fact that they were both Israeli diplomats. But this is now, this broader cause that anyone is a legitimate target. Anyone is a member of the jihad. It's not particularized to the Palestinians and Israelis anymore, and that's why it's our problem.
At Heritage, you're also working on something called Project Esther. I know that you've authored this report together with two of your colleagues, Rob Greenway, you mentioned, and Daniel Flesch, and maybe some other people as well. But this is very much kind of like a plan for how to stop the pro-Palestinian movement because of its kind of slippery slope towards this violent anti-Semitism, but just in general, to deal with anti-Semitism in America. What can you tell us about what this plan looks like?
Yes, well, it was such a shocking and horrifying thing for me to do know that I got a front page New York Times profile last Tuesday on the topic. We were so secretive about
the badge of honor you can wear. Yes.
It's a badge of honor. But yes, and that we have been so secretive about this that we've been holding public events and meetings for a year and published a long form report about it, which is free for everyone to look at. And our point is that, we are not here to squelch pro-Palestinian expressions. We are here to squelch pro-Hamas expressions, because Hamas has been a designated terrorist group in the United States since the 1980s, and they are not responsible for every act of anti-Semitism, and that's a very important point in the United States, but they are responsible for the vast majority of them. And we have all the statistics in the report. So while we are concerned about other manifestations of this bigotry, we're going to start by going after the biggest proponent of it. And so that's the pro-Hamas people. And we have various recommendations in the legal field, in the legislative field, in the financial field that can be pursued. And we're organizing other groups to help us with that work because, it takes time, manpower, money to go after these things. But there's a history of this being successful with something like the Holy Land Foundation case 20 years ago, which was after an NGO that said, oh, we're just a wonderful Islamic Charity, and it turns out they were funneling money to Hamas. So this can be done. This is how you combat these people: is you starve them of resources and support, and that's what we're hoping to do with Esther.
And what do you think about the president's or the administration's moves when it comes to colleges and universities, particularly Harvard, which has made the most headlines in stopping funding and saying no more international students? I mean, put aside the court cases that are now being kind of those battles that are being waged. We'll see what ends up happening. But this also seems to be part of that, right? The campuses is where it formats. It's where this stuff it grows and then explodes eventually.
It does. And there's a lot of a background on that. If your listeners are interested in the battle for the Jewish state, where this came from the radicals in the 60s, how it metastasized with the pro-Palestinian folks. My only disappointment with President Trump's actions is he's been too lenient on Penn. I understand that Harvard's the giant whale, but all the Ivies have this problem. In Penn, it's particularly bad because historically Penn has had the highest percentage of Jewish students, something they've spent the last 15 years systematically lowering. So they know what they've been doing. And I think the folks who are concerned about what is going to happen to scientific research, which is indeed concerning, I think, to all Americans, our universities should be laboratories of innovation and scientific research that will benefit us. They've got to rid the rest of the campus of this problem. And by the way, a lot of medical schools have this problem. So this all we all agree we want good scientific research at our major universities. This has to get cleaned up first. So the president is 100% correct in what he's doing. I support them just wholeheartedly and hope they do more.
Victoria Coates, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely a pleasure. Talk soon.
Thanks for joining me on today's episode. As always, you can find us where podcasts can be found on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and the website of Times of Israel. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast. Until then, have a Shabbat Shalom